Welcome to MGAA Conversations, our new podcast channel where we'll be discussing with an exciting number of guests all things related and topical within the ever-growing MGA community. Welcome to our latest MGAA Conversations podcast. Today, I'm delighted to welcome David Nichols, UK Head of Retail at Zurich, and Clive Nathan, CEO Underwriting at Brown & Brown. Gentlemen, a very good afternoon to you both.
Hi, Mike.
Afternoon, Mike.
Great to have you here, and I'm sure our listeners are absolutely delighted to get you two together and to talk about this fantastic partnership you have. So, before we go into that partnership, please, perhaps if I could come to you, Dave, first, and I'm going to ask you both. Just give us sort of your view of current market conditions and the MGA sector in particular.
So really interestingly, and I probably would start by saying it depends, Mike, because there are really specialist MGAs out there that run a different path to some of the more standard MGAs. For me, though, across the board, I think MGAs in particular have quite a buoyant place in the market right now. I think there's a lot of opportunity to work with them. I think there's some really interesting propositions, and I think they add a really exciting and interesting dynamic to the UK marketplace. So it feels quite positive from my point of view.
Excellent. And Clive, through your lens?
Yeah, I think the same. I had two experiences last week. One was Beaver, which was always a hugely enjoyable event as ever. And I think the fact that we had so many conversations with capacity, with brokers, all of whom are keen to trade more, want to do more, I think is evidence of what David said about the sort of the buoyancy of the market. And then secondly, on Friday, we had a leadership call with our US, what they call programs colleagues. So that's the MGA sector. And most of the messages from over there were the same. A softening market, but with huge demand from both capacity and brokers to work with quality MGAs. So I think, yeah, if you're good, you're getting a lot of attention at the moment.
Excellent. Well, that's a great platform to move into your own relationship. So Zurich and Brown & Brown developing, have a great relationship sort of through Plum. Clive, if I can come to you first, and again, you touched on capacity and market appetite. When you look at capacity and if you look at changing, what considerations do you give, you and your team, and in particular, why you've signed with David and his team?
I think most of it is down to culture and cultural fit. We do, as you know, Mike, we have a long history of M&A in our business, and the businesses that we buy, we have to have a great cultural fit, and that's true also with our partners, with our capacity partners. And I think it was the personal relationships initially with I hate to give him too much credit, but Barry Driscoll, who now and I won't mention those people who have subsequently left the organisation to move elsewhere, but really good personal relationships with people at Zurich, and I think what we look for, Mike, and we had if you look at Plum, we had a business, a good business that was on the cusp of greatness, and I think over the last few years has developed that. And what we were looking for really was that long-term relationship, and probably the previous relationship was more of an annual cycle. Yeah. And what Zurich were offering was that long-term stability, the strong relationship, good commercials, limited intrusion, which I always look for. Like they back us and they let us get on with it. But predominantly, it was about those personal relationships and the culture that we've developed together with Zurich. So it's all those things, really.
And just if I can just pivot back on that point, and not wanting to embarrass Dave and his team too much, but when you look across, David and his peers, and I know you won't know names of organisations you may have actually engaged with, clearly, that culture thing, that willingness long term stood out and above perhaps that enthusiasm which may have come from elsewhere in the market. Would that be fair?
Yeah, and I think what we've also recognised, and I'll come back to this maybe in what I say in the future, is there are quite a lot of people um, who give a lot of interest and talk a good game. And I think what we've encountered with the Zurich team is they deliver. We have if you go out to our data winner office, they have little lanyards with GSD, which means get stuff done, and so we that's our sort of mantra. And I think what we find in Zurich is a partner who also gets stuff done. So I think there was a lot of people who talked a good game. What these guys did was just did it.
Excellent. So, David, just comes to you. So, I know we talked about this in the past, and it was very clear in terms of that Zurich lacked scale in personal lines through the sort of the traditional broker market, and you were very sort of clear in terms of why you withdrew from sort of broker sort of personal lines. So, putting that to one side, what through sort of your own lens and Zurich's team lens, what was particularly attractive to sort of the Plum portfolio? Where did the Brown and Brown MGA team impress you as such? Don't want this to become a complete love-in because you're deploying the capital, you're paying the claims effectively, so you have the checkbook. So just share with us in terms of those your own sentiments and your own views from you and your team on that.
Yeah, and I'm really happy to because actually when you look at Plum and the Brown and Brown team, I think they tick all the boxes in terms of doing the right things. So Plum in itself has a very, very specific market focus, and they're really clear about that. And I think that immediately makes it attractive because you're working with a partner that understands the market that they're playing in. And to understand a market like that means that they're going to respond really, really quickly. They're going to keep the proposition up to date, and they're going to keep focused on the thing that is attractive to that MGA. That's then backed up by fantastic underwriting knowledge, where they understand that sector so superbly well. They know what they're doing in that space. They know where they can write attractive risks, and that's massively beneficial from our point of view. And then I think the third area is that mutual understanding, and Clive touched on that a little bit. It is a proper partnership, and it's very easy in these partnerships to get into sort of the rub situation where an insurer wants to be more intrusive because actually they underwrite risk, and that's exactly the thing that you shouldn't do. If you're happy with the capability that partner brings to you, and if they've got deep rooted knowledge in the sector they're serving, then that should be where we let them get on with it, and that should be where we free them up to achieve the growth ambitions that we would jointly have. And I think that the Plum and the Brown and Brown team bring all of that in bucket loads. They really understand their sector with the Plum proposition, and I just feel super confident about what they do. I think it's a brilliant customer proposition, and I think it's underwritten superbly well.
Just on that oversight and as Clive says, positive interference or lack of interference is that something, David, when you look across your portfolio of MGAs, that you have different degrees in terms of where you do more oversight, or do you think you have a one size fits all?
Yeah, I think there are differing levels, Mike, because by default there need to be differing levels. With something like Plum, which is non-standard home, the Plum team have the deepest understanding of that market position. And by default, you have to stand back and say, well, what value will we add in that scenario? We trust them. The relationship is good. We have very open dialogue. What benefit do you have in being driven to drive more oversight in a situation like that? I think it differs if you have a very standard proposition, or if you don't have longevity in the relationship, it takes time to get there, and therefore by default you'll have a sort of slightly differing level of oversight. But you have to establish your pattern and your routine. But I think you also have to go back to the skill set that the partnership brings forward. And if you're comfortable with the skill set, you need to let the skill set run with it.
Yeah, and that I could do a segue into the whole expense sort of analysis on that, or cost of expenses, because, but I suppose without tongue in cheek, it is what, as you're saying, David, why duplicate something which you're already experts are already doing? So it's a great
And that is
segue.
exactly it. That is exactly it. You cannot take a relationship like Plum and then model it based on if you did it all yourself internally. You have to build your cost base back up, knowing what you are not going to do and being clear about what you're not going to do versus what you do. Otherwise, you don't make it stack up. And I think the Plum team make it very easy for us to stand back and build our base based on the knowledge that they bring, and based on the trust that we have in the decision making that they take forward.
Excellent, excellent. So I want to move now on to onboarding. Actually, now, I would say onboarding, or the challenge of onboarding, is probably at least in the top 5 challenges when I speak to our members. Okay, so they'll get all signed off. It's a arms race to bind the first piece of business, etc. And then all of a sudden, part of the organisation, to be fair, traditionally in the capital provider isn't aware of the deal, and then it all starts to take time. So Clive, if I come to you first, when you look at the Zurich's onboarding process and your team's engagement, and you compare that to the market, what particularly impresses you in terms of how Zurich engage on that onboarding piece?
I mean, there is a real danger here, Mike, that this is going to be a bit of a
Oh, I've got plenty of left field stuff to throw in.
So I'm sorry about this, but so we've worked with. I know we've talked quite a bit about Plum already, but we've worked with Zurich for 17 years on Candyford. So that's you must know this, Mike. That's quite an unusual length of time for a capacity partner to continue to support an individual MGA. So we've known each other through that sort of delegated authority model for a long time. So I think Zurich really understood what we were about. I think there's a couple of things. One is, I think what we like about the Zurich team is there's a lack of ego about it. And I think sometimes what you find, and that ego translates itself into a bit related to brand. We're really good at this, so we need to do this. And it's a bit linked to what David just said anyway. So, and then you hit a barrier on your onboarding. Oh, no, we have to do this ourselves because we're world class at this. I think what Zurich have recognised is, even if they were really good at it, actually that's not the model. That's not our model. So if you take claims, for example, which I know we'll talk about, that was really important to us, that we like to call ourselves a virtual insurer. We wanted to do everything, and Zurich didn't sort of go back to their ego and say, oh, no, but claims is our core proposition. They were happy to hand that over. So I think fundamentally it's about longevity. So the 17-year Camberford relationship, it's not having that big sort of ego of we have to do things this way. And I think the third thing is we had teams deployed on this who were clearly aligned. So at all levels, we had that alignment at senior level, at sort of risk and compliance level, at HR, at all the different levels, finance. Everybody knew that this was a deal that we wanted to do and we wanted to renew. So it wasn't, we didn't have anybody who was sort of blindsided by it, as you said, Mike. Sometimes you come to, well, I don't know anything about this, and I want to go over I want to turn every corner, I want to turn every page over again. We didn't have that. But, and finally, obviously pass it to David if that's what you want. These things take time. They do take time, and what we recognise, particularly when we did the renewal, is that we started those conversations almost a year before we did it, because it's a bit like buying a house. Of course, you could buy a house in 2 weeks, in theory. who's ever done that? It does take 3 months, 6 months, and we knew that it would take time because there are lots of things to do. Because fundamentally, Zurich are giving us their authority, and we don't take that lightly. And it's got to be ironed out very clearly as to who does what, and we did that really well. And we're super grateful for that.
Yes, so David, I'll pass the baton to you now. And again, let's not talk about your experience with Brown and Brown, but what I am interested in is the conscious decisions Zurich have made around that investment in terms of onboarding, because reputational wise, and I've shared this with you previously, you have a fantastic reputation for onboarding for a lot of the reasons Clive's articulated. So just stepping outside of the sort of the Plum and Brown and Zurich loving, what actually, where did you sort of take the view within Zurich that this onboarding, because it is actually sets you apart slightly from some of your peers?
Yeah, for me, it's all wrapped up in our focus on deal management, Mike. In that, deals come in a multitude of different ways. MGAs being one facet of that, delegated schemes another. Things as simple as rollover deals, and I think we've built a team up that understands that process from a tendering point of view, from a due diligence point of view, and then from an implementation point of view, and they track that all the way through. And the thing is, if they're there at the start of it, they're clear, we really want it. If they're then part of the tendering exercise, we are in that tendering exercise to win. We're not doing it to tick a box. We want to win because we like the partnership that's on the table. And then that extends through to the implementation process as well, because there's no point in going through the first two and then thinking, oh, well, let's make a complete fist of this when we go to implementation, because you've immediately lost the respect of the partner that you're trying to work with. So for me, it's about having consistency across those three stages. And it's about being really clear about the arrangement that you're working with, and being clear about what they're bringing to the table, and therefore how we need to respond to what they're bringing to the table. And Clive is absolutely right. They take time, they really do, but all parties have to stay focused on wanting it to happen, because that is when I think it starts to fall off the rails. And we have got examples of doing arrangements in a few weeks. Probably not our preference to do things in a few weeks because you are running at an incredible pace. But it's about keeping both sides aligned to the fact that we've agreed to do it, we are doing it, and we need to find a way through.
Yeah, I think I'd endorse what Clive said. I think other sort of capital providers, the ability for them to ensure everybody's on the same page and signed up to that deal, I think is something maybe other organisations could work harder at, because there's a lot of cost involved, hidden cost, where, as Clive's alluded to, you have to restart the deal again to get somebody on board because they haven't been in at the table at the right time. So I think your phrase deal management is a good way of sort of capturing that. If I could stay with you, David, and Clive touched upon a little bit about claims, and obviously you have a strong sort of claims background. There's a whole topic around MGA claims models, how that works, investment, whatever, which I'm going to ask Clive on in a second. But, you know, generally, you're paying all the claims. Okay. So in terms of writing the checks ultimately, and how that process is between yourselves and sort of Brown and Brown. But when you look at the specific claims handling, the claims model of an MGA, and let's look at the Brown and Brown one, which Clive's alluded to, what particularly gives you that confidence that, things around indemnity control, customer outcomes, etc., was sufficient that you were more than happy to plug into the Brown and Brown claims model?
So I think I would say, Mike, it's a bit of a repetition of where I started, in that Brown and Plum are very specialist in the area that they've built the proposition that Plum serves. And on the underwriting side, they've got deep-rooted knowledge of the risks that they're there to attract in. And, they know what the wording needs to look like. They know how to underwrite those risks. And if you take that sort of full circle into the value chain, it means equally they've got deep-rooted knowledge of what claims they're going to get in the area that they've built the proposition. And so it therefore stands to reason that it's better keeping it all together, because you've got then a value chain that is built entirely on deep-rooted expertise in the area of the market that they're serving. And I struggle with any insurer mindset that says that's not the best model here, because you're talking about a niche market segment where the MGA has built really deep knowledge, and you are far better off leveraging that knowledge. Now, I think that changes depending on the market segment that any arrangement is serving. So if it was a very standard market segment, there's probably more of a debate to be had about where some of the value chain gets allocated. But I think when you're talking about a very specialist sector like that of Plum, and when you're talking about specialist capabilities that Brown and Brown bring to the table, it stands to reason that keeping it together is better from a customer journey point of view, and it's better from an overall outcome point of view as well.
Yeah. Okay. Can I ask you, perhaps, could you sort of share your own experiences? Because obviously you have a multi-line, multi-class sort of large MGA, and claims covers all of that. And David made some very valid points with that sort of forensic expertise. But generally, and I think we probably all may agree, the three of us, generally that claims conversation can be quite challenging, even if you can demonstrate that sort of level of expertise. So what's your experience, Clive, when you look at it holistically across the market, and both capital providers you deal with and those you've actually engaged with?
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Mike. There are some people who don't want to have that conversation.
Right.
It's off the agenda. We will. Claims delegation is not part of our model, and that's fine. That maybe works for some people, but it doesn't really. It doesn't really work for us. Maybe in particular the specialist niches where perhaps, but in this area, it was really important to us that we had that full delegation, and so that was really a sort of a stepping off point, and one that we were happy with. Zurich and ourselves were very happy with. I think there is a point on this though, Mike, that you've got to have sufficient scale. I know you talked about us. We try not to look at ourselves as a big business. It's a cultural thing again that we don't want to be a big business. Brown and Brown generally, if you talk to the guys all over the world, they would say Brown and Brown don't want to position themselves as a big business, despite the fact we're sort of 17,000 teammates across the world. But you've got to have some scale in claims. It's very difficult to do claims with, when you're only getting a very small amount and you can only afford to put 2 people on it. We've got a fairly large team predominantly based in Basildon, in Essex, that have got sufficient scale to be able to cope with surge, to be able to cope with, the fact that there'll be times when there's spikes in claims reporting. So I think there does have to be scale, and frankly, you've also got to invest in the people, in the systems. Fraud technology's moved on massively, particularly in home claims. And we've done all of that, and you can't really do that if you're only dealing with a few hundred claims a year, and obviously we're dealing with more of that. And I am legally contracted to say that the Brown and Brown claims team did win the Insurance Times Claims Award of Team of the Year in 2024. So I'm able to say that and tick that box. But they did, and we're very proud.
Well, you've said that twice now, so there we go. So let me, because I just want to sort of ask another question on this, because I think the Brown and Brown Zurich thing, and David, you've articulated, makes complete sense, and you've supported that. I suppose, and I'll throw it open to both of you. I suppose the challenge from running an MGA, where if the claims goes directly into insurer, and again from a TPA, you know, MGAs live and die on their ULRs. Let's be frank on that. Okay, and by Clive, you having your in-house, you've got more exercise, far more control around claims management, cycle times, and whatever. If you go, and you know which way I'm going with this, gents, if you go the other route, then the MGA is more reliant on third parties in terms of indemnity mitigation, cycle times, you know, highlighting the right outcomes, etc. And that can all impact their ULR, with the fact that if capacity then says, well, look, we're exiting from here, then without having that either oversight or real influence on claims, because it's been done third party, then effectively you could actually sort of lose capital without much fault of your own. So let me come to you first, David. So, you know, what, from a general market perspective, how does an MGA get confidence from a carrier that their claims, and I would underline the word their claims, are going to be managed and looked after from all the things which mitigate ULR, you know, as opposed to going into, let's call it, and I don't mean this, you know, in a bad way, sort of a big insurer claim shed from that bit. If you see the point I'm trying to make.
No, I do, and you know, I agree with everything you said, Mike, because that could become a real challenge to an MGA if they can't get their arms around something that is ultimately going to impact their ULR. And I think it comes back to basics around performance management. If you don't have your claims together end to end, if they're not within your control, you have to agree some predetermined performance criteria that you can sit down and you can review with whoever is providing that claims support. So I think it puts, you know, a really important focus on the regular performance discussions that you've agreed with your MGA. And I think it's ensuring that both sides are prepared to dig in when they see something going astray. And you know, it's probably when you need to be more transparent than ever, but forensically digging in, getting both sides around the table, understanding it is not a case, I think, where either party can sit back and say, oh well, that's the ULR. You have to get forensic around what you're seeing in the claims space, and you have to dig into the outcomes, and you have to dig into what trends might be driving it, because ultimately it's really important that you take action in the right way. And I think having some criteria up front is super helpful in the scenario where the claims handling doesn't sit in the MGA.
And to that, Clive, in terms of that sense.
Uh, just briefly, I would say, and I will call them out, but we've had dedicated claims managers from Zurich, a chap called Glyn Johnson and now Tracy O'Neill, who've been excellent. And I love this stuff anyway, but I see it on the quarterly large loss review. We go through the full detail of any claims over 100K. We look at the circumstances. I could probably, it's, I enjoy it, but it's also about both us and Zurich looking at those losses and saying, what can we do to mitigate it? What can we do to ensure we get the right customer outcome? But also, what can we learn from it? And we do that. And I sit in on those, and my team sits on those. And that's a really important part of the relationship. We've done that and we've used the Zurich model as a template for other people. Yeah. Some people have sort of got behind that, and others it's like, we haven't had a large loss review now for 6 months. Are we going to have one? Oh yeah, I must get round to it, sort of thing. Whereas Zurich, we've got the discipline. I literally can tell you, the guys that sit on it, I can tell you the names of the claims because it's so familiar to us. So I would just say that's something that I would highly recommend to other MGAs as part of the way that you do things, because you learn so much from it. You learn about whether there's health and safety that you should have been doing better as a, from an underwriting point of view, or whether you should be dealing with something in different ways. So that would be just one other thing.
Excellent. Okay, so we're gonna quash the loving now. So frankly, you know, I'm sure the relationship has been tested at some point, you know, so a couple of quick questions. So has there been a point sort of during the relationship that it has been tested, and how has that sort of developed? And probably just as importantly, you know, where would you see, the potential friction areas, if there are going to be, as you continue to evolve, because life can't be, it gets a bit boring if you're not sort of falling out with each other every now and again, just for a bit of fun. So what about, let's go first, what about testing the relationship? Has there been any examples on that you can share with the listeners?
No.
Yes.
Yeah, clearly there are,
Good,
Mike. You're
good.
absolutely right. You can't have a healthy relationship without there being some really healthy tension in it,
Yeah.
because it makes both sides better from my point of view. After you, though, Clive.
I would say, definitely. And a couple of things spring to mind, Mike. One is what I mentioned earlier. So when we signed the Plum deal and we did the Canberra, that wasn't with this team. That wasn't with David and Jackie and Alex and the guys that we deal with. It was a completely different team. And those guys have moved on or moved up or moved into different parts of the organisation. And we were worried about that. We were concerned that we didn't know the people. David was in claims and was coming into it, and we were concerned about that. But and it does continue to love him. But genuinely, they've taken the time to get to know the business, and it's been really, really seamless. So that was one area that we were concerned about. Secondly, I think, and David and I dealt with this probably 2 years ago. We had a situation, a contractual situation, that there was probably some confusion over exactly how the contract was drafted, and it wasn't drafted by David. It was drafted, and I think, I can't remember if we did it over a glass of wine, a cup of coffee, or over a telephone call, David, but we sat down and we said, this wasn't really what was intended. And I didn't really know David that well at the time. But he said, well, let me go away and look at it. And he did, and he came back and he said, I can see what's happened here. And if I wanted to play hardball, I could probably stand behind this contract and it would cause you a problem. And he said, but I'm not going to do that. He said, the relationship's more important to me than that. And I can see what was meant to have happened, and I'm going to stand behind that. So that was an example of where there could have been tension, but there wasn't. And that I think, in many ways, David, I think that sort of made our relationship, didn't it? Really?
Yeah, I agree, Clive. And it's interesting because I was probably going to touch on the same example, and I was going to call it as sort of oversight, in that even with the deal team and the due diligence that you do and the getting to know each other, it is very easy in the early stages or during transitions for people to come and sort of add value with the oversight that they want to do, because people want to add value, whether that's from an underwriting or a claims point of view. And it's very easy in those situations where they add value to probably go further than was ever intended to go in terms of the oversighting process, and that can create tension. And you have to stand back and you have to look at the outcomes that you're trying to achieve, and you have to look at those outcomes and say, okay, well, what part in this relationship is both parties playing, and where should we be standing down? So don't add value in that particular way. Find a different way of adding value, because that's not where we want to get. We need to protect the capability that the MGA has, and we need to protect the outcomes that they deliver, because they know what they're doing. So I think even with a great onboarding process, there is always the danger that when you go live, you're gonna run into those overburdening requirements, and you just need to be alive to it. You need to have a healthy conversation, and where it's not where it was intended, you just need to find a way of stamping it out.
A bit of pragmatism always helps, no doubt. A bit of pragmatism.
Well, I think also it's also that personal relationship, Mike. You know, we talk a lot about what can't AI do, and you know, and you know, maybe AI can do personal relationships, you know, but it's quite difficult to build that personal sort of connection that says you and I need to do this. This is not about 20 lawyers sitting in a room going at each other and charging us a fortune. This is about you and me. How are we going to take this forward? And that's what happened. And you know, I've yet to see AI be able to do that, but who knows?
Okay, so we're drawing to a close. So I've got one sort of final question, both. So what does the future hold for Zurich and Brown & Brown? I'll go to you first, Clive.
We're super, as you can tell from this call. We're very, very happy with the way our relationship is with Zurich. What we don't do though is we don't like to lift portfolios from other people and move stuff around just because, oh, you know, there's a slightly better deal over there, or you know, we're constantly doing that. We put a lot of store by our the longevity of our partnerships, but we are acquisitive. We've already bought one business this year, Premier Commercial, in our first Brown & Brown foray into Scotland. And we've got others in due diligence. We've got one in due diligence at the moment, others in the pipeline. That's the sort of thing that we can see the MGA taking forward with Zurich in terms of developing the volume side of our relationship, in terms of that side, and then on organic growth, we're still expecting on home business. We've talked a lot about Plum. We're still carrying rate in Plum. We're still expecting that to go forward, and we expect that to be a much bigger part of what we do with Zurich. And then I suppose the final area that we would expect to grow together in what the future is that how we build technology together and how we do things better and with less friction. So that's what we would take forward.
And David?
So there's not much that I can't already add to what Clive has said, in that, you know, I want to see the existing arrangements continue to flourish and to continue to grow, and that's why we're here jointly. But to add to that, I would say I think the Brown & Brown team demonstrate a really strong competence around MGAs. You know, they know them, they understand them, they have strong capability in underwriting, they have strong capability in claims, they understand the markets that they're serving. So quite honestly, if there was an opportunity and Brown & Brown came knocking, we would always listen, because their capability is so super strong, and that would encourage us to have a conversation with them, because they know what they're doing in this space, and I would be here to support them.
Okay, on that note, I'd like to thank you both, gentlemen, for your insights. I think for our listeners, there's some real key learnings coming out and some real key messages in terms of what makes capacity in an MGA partnership really work. You know, the pragmatism, the open communication, certainly AI not replacing the personal relationship. Hopefully that will never happen. But again, thank you very, very much indeed for your time and for your insights, and enjoy the rest of your day. All the best.
Thanks, Mike.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Clive.
Bye-bye.
Many thanks for listening. We welcome all feedback, so please get in touch with your suggestions on topics and future guests. Please don't forget to subscribe on your chosen platform so that you don't miss out.